yet. And so good day, everyone. I think most of us should be in the kind of either afternoon or late evening. But then, of course, those of you who are joining kind of afterwards with the recorded session, it's good to have all of you here with us today in another one of our Meet the EiR kind of sessions that we're doing for orientation this week. And so today we have Rokham as one of our entrepreneurs in residence that we're going to be taking the opportunity to introduce you all to. And I've been saying this in a lot of the EiR sessions, but I can definitively say that Rokham has actually been the longest tenured EiR at the DMZ. And I think it might have been just after Hassam started, maybe in 2015, Rokham, when we started working together, I want to say.
Not 2015, but 2017.
2017, okay. Yeah. Okay.
It's like roughly 4 years, I think.
4 years. Wow. And so, you know, one thing I'll say, and this is not something I'm proud to admit, but I say this just because this should all go to show you how effective Rokham is. When Rokham first came to talk to the DMZ to potentially become a mentor, I actually said no. I said we didn't have a need. I don't know if you remember that, Rokham, but you know, through Roham's persistence and his persuasive ways, he was able to have me thankfully see the light. And so, if that's anything for all of you, just to show how Rokham is able to, find his way, whether it's into a sale, a deal, a partnership, or anything like that. He was able to take me from a no to a yes. And I think a lot of our founders at the DMZ are very thankful that I wasn't stubborn that day. And so, Rokham, not only have the expectations been set that we've got some people who are up very late for you, but I've also kind of started things off with that. And so without any further ado, Rokham, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks, Shane. And nothing but love for the DMZ. I'm both behind your back and in front of everybody. I always say what a wonderful organization DMZ is, because one thing you guys should all know, people who are new to the group, one thing I always attribute to the DMZ, it's the very rare startup ecosystem that I know every act is in favor of the founders. It's almost like, and I've walked through a lot of organizations and you kind of deal with them and you kind of see what's lip service and what's action. I can wholeheartedly stand behind it. So I'm honored to be part of this group. And thanks for the opportunity and all the excitement. I hope we can turn this into a fruitful session for everybody. My goal, this is where my bar is for myself in every one of these sessions. So I try to live up to this as much as I can, is that and I'll give you guys a quick background on myself so you get the context, but I always want, at the end of the session, we leave the session with some practical to-dos. I feel like that's usually a win, as opposed to what I call the alternative is hand-wavy business discussions, which we can all get for free everywhere. And so making things practical is building everything into mini frameworks that I've built in my head, and hopefully transferring it to you guys. And they tend to be very business agnostic, so hopefully applicable across the board. I'll give you guys a very quick background on myself, and then we'll dive into the vortex method. And I think Shane was part of that, coining that term at some point. I'm sure you were involved in the we'll get to that story in a second. But just for you guys to know, I'm a software engineer by training. I'm out of Toronto. I went to U of T. I studied computer science, worked at IBM for a few years, and became an accidental entrepreneur about 13 plus years ago. Didn't have any background, and literally it was an accidental entrepreneurship. We started building a company in the world of residential homes for sale. We bootstrapped for a good 4+ years with zero light at the end of the tunnel, and making all the mistakes under the sun that you could look back and kind of laugh or beat yourself at it. And then we were fortunate enough that some of those mistakes turned out to be, good decisions along the way. And we managed to raise our first round of financing and then consequent rounds. And we were very fortunate for a lot of, external factors, as well as, you work hard. Of course, everybody works hard, but you also get lucky. And essentially over the years, we managed to grow that company to become Canada's largest online real estate brokerage, which was span across the country. and to about 180 people. And it was a hell of a ride. It was a lot of obviously ebbs and flows, as you could imagine. It was a B2C marketplace for residential homes for sale, called the Red Pin. And then after the Red Pin, I started my second startup, which is called psychologycompass.com, which is essentially, in a one or two sentences, is a cognition coach in your pocket to help you reach your peak mental performance. And essentially, we translate decades of research in psychology and neuroscience into practical, essentially micro habits that you can incorporate into your day-to-day and enhance your various cognitive functions, such as focus, ability to cope with anxiety, overcoming self-doubt, and many others, in a very quantified manner. And it's all in an automated way. So Psychology Compass is more of a B2B SaaS product in a categorical way. So, with the Red Pin, it was a lot of, first we built the product of my partner and I, we were the engineers behind the scene. And then a lot of growth marketing I had to self-teach myself. Part of it is SEO, part of it is paid campaigns, then it's Facebook and paid, then it's PR and all of, content writing and all that good stuff that we all know of. But B2B is a different beast. You have to sell to enterprises, and we can talk about that as well. But for the purposes of this session, which is the Vortex method, now you guys kind of have a little bit of a background on me. I like these sessions to be more interactive, just for the record. So if there's anything pops up, just maybe either put up your hand physically, or if you feel more comfortable with the emojis, put up your hand. And I like this to be more of a dialogue as opposed to a monologue, because whatever is your question, probably a lot of other people would leverage from it as well, right? But the Vortex method, it comes and stems from a very, very common pattern I've seen, both for myself as well as every company that pretty much I've interacted with, is that when you're a young startup, you always want to do growth or marketing strategies that are either low to no cost, and two, they have both short-term and long-term returns, right? It's just, this is always the battle you're dealing with. It's just like, what can I do for almost no money spent or very little? And then I have some immediate returns as well as some long-term, long-lasting returns, so that I don't, I build some equity in my growth. So that's the premise of the Vortex method. We just called it the Vortex method because we were talking a lot about it, and the it had to be given a name. So we gave it, but Shane was, I think, in the room, or at some point he was involved in that. The Vortex method, just for visual purposes, I always think of the sales funnel being like a cone. You start users from the top, and then using the Vortex, you try to push them down the sales funnel. That's for visual purposes. So what we're gonna, and if you guys want to take notes, this is all you have to draw if you have a piece of paper, because I'll use a lot of my hands. I don't like slides much. We don't need much slides, but just for point of reference for my hand gestures, you can draw a circle, a big circle on a piece of paper, and put 5 spokes that come out of it. So 5 little lines that come out of it. That's all we need. And then I'll keep coming back to that, right? And we'll fill it up as a point of reference for your visual reference later on. So what is the Vortex method? Is essentially the principles around it is that we want to take a very data-driven approach, so not guessing too much, and being able to identify problem statements that people, meaning your audience, has out there in a quantified manner, and be able to provide the best answer to those problems. And this is a little bit subjective, but we'll talk about how we make it more objective and what subjectivity means here, and essentially become discoverable so that you can start creating a little bit of an inbound net for attracting people who are your potential customers, who have certain problems that you've identified, and you can provide certain answers to them. And essentially the hub and spoke model, the circle that I told you guys about with the 5 spokes that's coming out of it, is the foundation we're going to build around it. The hub is what we build, which is the effort, and I'll walk through how we build it. The spokes are the benefits that come out of it. And we're only going to cover 5 of them, but you guys can easily see there's multiple more spokes that come out of it eventually, but just want to give you the different flavors of it. I've personally used this method without knowing what it's called and kind of consolidating in my head, and it actually works. I used it for the red pen, I've used it for Psychology Compass, and we've deployed it at multiple companies at the DMZ, right? So it's very agnostic, it's very flexible. And the good thing I like about it is you get to choose how much effort your company you want to put into this. It's very, very elastic in that sense. So you don't have to commit 80% of your time into it if you don't have the time. So let's now go through it. So first step, remember, is the hub, which is the circle, which is how do we know what we're going to build so that it attracts our audience? And in order for us to vet what's deemed valuable, there's 2 quantifiable tests we're going to run through, right? So a lot of us know about content marketing. This is very much in that vein, but you'll see how it expands beyond just the typical, let's go create a blog for our website and move on, right? This is basically where the depth of most blogs goes. Just like, let's come up with a blog, let's just publish whatever frequency we can go with, right? So what you want to do, assuming you know your audience, you know the problems you're solving. So first what you do, you want to brainstorm questions or problem statements that your audience would potentially be looking for. And for the sake of this conversation, we can obviously go through examples for your respective businesses, but I'll just use examples around Psychology Compass just because it's top of mind, right? So we help people with peak mental performance, right? So what does that mean cognitively speaking? For example, people would say, how do I overcome anxiety? That's a question that people would ask. Or people would say, how do I overcome burnout? Right? These are all, we all can agree, we can nod to this, right? Or how do I overcome imposter syndrome? And many other things. And I'm sure you guys can come up with a bunch of these intent-driven questions for your audience, right? But we don't know which one of these are the most valuable for us to go after and put a lot of effort in, because building that little hub is going to take quite some effort, right? So we're going to run it through 2 tests. First, you brainstorm a bunch of ideas that you deem valuable. And then what we do, the first test is around demand, or how much demand is out there for this problem statement, like user demand, let's call it. The second set of tests we do is around publisher demand, right? So on the user demand, there are multiple tools out there, but I usually like to use Keyword Planner, which is by Google itself, and it's free. You essentially grab your what's called key phrase. So when I say how to overcome burnout, right? Overcoming burnout is probably the key phrase, right? Not the how part, right? So the key phrase, usually rule of thumb, is that you want it to be between 2 to 4 words combined that are almost clear what the problem at hand is. They indicate the exact problem the user is looking a solution around. And then you basically put it into Keyword Planner. The rule of thumb is, again, occasionally companies are geographically restricted for whatever they do, like if you're in real estate, to Canada. So I'll give you guys the generic answers. Obviously, things have to be adjusted if you're geographically constrained. But usually we want to find key phrases that have between 1 to 10,000 searches per month in US and Canada combined. That's usually a good starting point where the numbers aren't too aggressive, so you're not competing with hotshots in the market, because at the end of the day, you're competing. And 2, it's not too nominal, because you would be surprised. So overcoming self-doubt and overcoming imposter syndrome semantically are very similar. But when you run it through the research, you might see, oh, overcoming imposter syndrome is a better key term. It fits the criteria better. So you want to kind of come up with the key phrase that you want to go after. And essentially what you want to do based on your brainstorming ideas, you want to identify those that have user demand that fits in the 1 to 10,000 searches per month. Then we get to the next test, which is the publisher demand. Now, what's publisher demand? Publisher demand essentially, and part of it, it becomes handy and important when we get to the first spoke we talk about, which is SEO benefits, search engine optimization, and being able to rank on Google. So what you want to do, obviously, if I put how to overcome self-doubt or overcoming self-doubt, there are 10 results that show up on the first page of Google, right? And what we're trying to do, part of this strategy, is to take one of those spots and be one of the top 10 results. So as much as you can do keyword searches and as much as you can write an incredible piece of content, that's roughly about 40% of ranking on SEO, which is referred to as on-page SEO, which is very much in your control. About 60% of ranking on Google is called off-page SEO, which is essentially what does the rest of the web think of this resource that you're providing? And Google, you know, if, for example, CNN.com links back to you, it's of a very high credibility versus my aunt's blog linking back to your post, right? That's basically Google is very intelligent in terms of giving weight on these things, right? So publisher analysis is exactly in line of that, right? So what I like to, as a starting point before we delve too deep into the SEO part of things, what you want to do, you want to put your key phrase in Google, grab the first 10 results, literally the first 10 articles or 10 first pages. So it's not the main domain of those pages, but the actual page that ranks on Google. And then you want to use other free tools on the web, which is essentially you want to look at backlinks to those pages, which means for every, literally we're going through 10 results, putting them in the tool and say, who are the domains and what are the pages that link back to those pages? And what you care about is this. I say at first, identify that there is at least 10 to 20 proper and high caliber backlinks to these 10 results. As long as you identify that there's 10 to 20, we're good to move forward. And what high caliber is, there's some parameters, I'll just jot them down, but if we have one-on-one sessions, we can dive into more detail into the quantified metrics. But you want the backlinker, meaning the third party that links to these 10 results, to be having a domain authority of 20 plus, so it's out of 100. You want them to be in English. You want them to visually look like a proper website. Like it doesn't look like a big, let's say, list, not a proper, like let's say you don't want it to be a directory page that lists, you know, links to 100 pages. You want it to be a prominent resource, right? And you want it to be what's called a do follow link, backlink. I know this is a little bit technical, but don't worry about it too much. But as long as you identify that there's 20 or 10 to 20 backlinks, that says two things. There's enough publisher demand, which means there are other third-party publications that care about covering this topic, which means they have their own audiences. And secondly, these third-party publishers have the appetite to link outside of their own domain. Because what we're going to do later on, we're going to grab the 20, expand it to about 100 or more, and try to get what is called backlinks. That's a very arduous task. That's more detailed I have to go through in terms of the process and how you win these backlinks. But always remember, 40% of SEO is on page, 60% is off page. And the off page is ridiculously more annoying than the on page because you're less in control of who is going to take you up on it. But there are a lot of interesting strategies that we can get, you know, follow in our follow-on conversation. So quick pause. Any questions in terms of assessing what we're going to talk about before we get to the next steps? No?
Can you do all of that with all these free tools that you mentioned? You don't need to engage with a service that does it for you?
No, you don't need it. These are more in-house. You have to do it. That's definitely one. with Keyword Planner, you can find the key, the demand generation. There are a lot of free tools that do the backlinking for you. As long as you Google, just like, I think they call it backlink profile, build, create finder. Like, as long the term is backlinking, right? Then you can put a URL and it tells you what are the backlinks. There are paid tools out there as well that you can use, such as Ahref is one of them. SEM Rush is another one. There's a bunch of them, right? They're usually about $100 a month, but I know $100 goes a long way in a young startup life. So I try to lean in on the free tools out there. Okay. So let's say we have identified a key phrase, which is essentially the core of a problem statement that our user has, in this case, how to overcome burnout, right? Now the idea is, we know there's enough demand for this problem. Now we're going to basically build the best answer on the entire web to that problem. And this is a little bit subjective, but I'll tell you how we can quantify it a bit better, right? So obviously we put that key phrase in Google. There were a bunch of people that were results 1 through 10, which is on page 1 of Google. So what you want to do, first, you want to read every one of those 10 results. And subjectively, we're writing something that is better than all of these 10 combined. And this is where the subjectivity comes into play, right? So you don't want it to be a regurgitation of all the 10 things covered into one post, because this is an absolutely common mistake everybody makes, which is this. They hire a freelance writer somewhere cheap, where currency arbitrages there usually is, like in the Philippines, people who speak English, but they write content and they say, here's your topic. And you know what they do? They do what everyone does. They Google it, they regurgitate everything, and you read it, you're like, this sounds right. It doesn't sound wrong. You put it out there and you put so many of them out there and you're happy you're getting a deal, and then you don't rank. So the challenge is this. I've found this to be the effective path, but it's also the challenging path, which is usually you want these questions to be answered by an industry expert, right? So it's usually one of the founders. Sometimes you have an executive that is has deep expertise, right? You don't actually want to outsource this to just some freelance writer who has no knowledge about your industry, because all they do is regurgitation, right? And that's the problem with the web. Like, you get a lot of the same, like I'm sure you guys have searched for stuff on Google, and every link you click, they say the same thing. And right, so there's a hybrid model. You can have like the expert do the outline of the post and then someone else fills it in, but you have to get creative on that front, right? But assuming you have the expert in-house that is going to write this content, here are some specifics on the content. We can obviously go into a lot more detail if we decide to do a one-on-one session. I get into deep kind of like reading the article, leaving comments to kind of fine tune it with people if this is of interest for you guys. But high level, in the current state of the web, meaning the amount of knowledge that's out there, and people do a lot of these studies on SEO fronts, is that you want the length of that. Remember, you're back to the hub. This is what you're creating. We want the length of that piece of content to be roughly around, if it's text, 2,000 to 2,500 words long, right? So you could immediately see this is a rich piece of content, right? And what I've learned, what you want to do, you want the content to have a lot of solutions to that problem. So this is another mistake people make. Let's say it's about overcoming burnout. A lot of people get, by default, they fall into sharing a lot of stats. So many people in the world are dealing with burnout. Burnout is an epidemic, blah, 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 right? Now, why this is blah, blah is this. Think about the user journey. Think about the person who is going to end up reading this. They have gone to Google. They have said how to overcome burnout. And guess what? They're looking for a solution, right? So the first thing this person cares about is a solution. The last thing this person cares about is how many other people are dealing with burnout. because they have already put up their hand and they're acknowledging that I have problems with. So this is a problem, and I think we all go through this process, repeating this problem, because this is how we're taught to write essays in school. I fundamentally think in our education system, we're given the way you write essays is, here's my hypotheses, here's reason 1, reason 2, reason 3, and here's the conclusion. And on the web, no one gives you that time of the day to go through this. It's a little bit in reverse, which is not the hypothesis. Instead, the intro is, in this post, you'll learn 5 techniques to overcome burnout that are backed by science in psychology and blah, blah, and neuroscience, etc. Because the moment that someone has searched on Google, clicked on your link, and reads that first 2 sentences, they're at the edge of their seat. They're like, oh, there's 5 techniques backed by blah, blah, blah that I'm going to learn on how to overcome my problem, right? You see this, I always think about the user journey. And there's a lot more details, we'll go through it, but I promise all of you, I've done this so many times, 2, maximum 3 iterations, you'll become a master at writing these in a way that hooks people and kind of gets them. And if you're in the back of your head thinking nobody reads 2,000 to 2,500 words long articles, I'll promise you that's not the case. There's plenty of data that backs it up, right? 5 to 6 minutes average times on the site on a mobile, people read it. And it's not just my data, there's plenty of, there are people who don't like, this is valid, that there are people who don't read text. Those people maybe YouTube search stuff, they listen to audiobooks, there's different ways, but those who Google, and there are people who read this, right? So we can talk about those metrics at some point as well, right? So 2,000 to 2,500 word long article. What I've seen consistently as a pattern is that in that length, you usually can put between 3 to 5 concrete solutions to that problem, right? So if it's 5, it's going to be literally the intro, 5 sections, 5, subsections, if you want to call it, and then a summary. And I'll get to it's not a conclusion, it's more of a summary. I'll explain the structure of the document in a sec. If it's 3, then your subsections are a bit richer because you need to go into more depth. And what you want to do, you want to be very, very prescriptive. So this is another common mistake, is that we tend to be very descriptive when we write these. And I think psychologically, we all feel a little bit shy to tell people how to overcome that problem. And this is my argument. There's 2 sides to this coin. If you are the expert in this industry, tell people exactly like an expert speaks. Like you go to a doctor, the doctor says, you say, I have this problem, they're like, do this and then do that. They don't start explaining the human metabolism for you if you want to lose weight. A dietitian says, no, this is how much calories you're going to have, this is what you're going to eat, right? You have to convey that sense of authority. And funny enough, the reader wants that authority. People are Googling to get answers. People are not, if you're, anything, pick any topic, investment topic, health topic, whatever it may be. If I Google, is Ethereum better, or, Bitcoin, the big guys, or altcoins are better, right? I want people to authoritatively give me reasons and tell me which one is better, not giving me like the lay of the land and giving me some vanilla justifications, right? So, and you would be shocked if you actually know your stuff, people get engaged and people read on and people kind of immerse and they build trust with your brand, right? So any questions so far in the skeleton of the, no? Okay. So just a quick summary, the skeleton is an intro, which is what you're going to get in this post. Then you have your 3 to 5 solutions. And then the replacement to a conclusion is a little bit of a summary. And the way I think of the summary is this. If someone has read your article before and they want a refresher, they kind of read the summary and it brings back the points. If they haven't read the article, they can't cheat and read the summary because there's not enough substance in the summary. If you guys want to see examples of these, you can go to Psychology Compass's blog. Every one of our, 75, 80 posts follows this exact skeleton that I shared. So, and psychology, I think every human being relates to psychology. Pick a topic that is interesting to you and just, you'll see it in action. Sometimes seeing tangible stuff is more easier to digest, right? So we have, oh, there's a question. Thank you. Go ahead, Lima.
So for example, we help teach children Arabic language at Adam Mishmash. So I was wondering if we were to write a post, for example, or a blog that says, here's 5 ways that you can teach Arabic to young children. And then I give 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then after the summary, I say, so download our app and you'll find all these methods there. Or is that like too gimmicky and pushy? Should you not like do a call to action at the end?
No, call to actions are really good. Like, obviously, that's the whole point of doing these content marketing, because you want to kind of slowly get people to enter your funnel. Now, I don't know your app per se. I don't know your funnel. We can talk about yours, right? But for example, what we do, anyone who's on mobile on our content, we send them to our application. Like, we have like literally a banner ad. We say like, you can download a coach in your pocket, right? In a, you know, obviously our organic traffic is higher because we've been doing it for some time, but you know, we get, I don't know, 200 free downloads, free registrations, not more than more downloads, but on the account on a weekly basis, something like that, right? So definitely you want to get them somewhere in your funnel, but the whole, you brought up something good. So the 5 thing, whatever, to teach Arabic to people, that's maybe a good query, depending if you do the reverse engineering and make sure there's enough demand. But you gotta make sure your content, the more novel your prescriptions are, and the more practical they are, the more exciting they are, right? Novel is people, you know, when things are cliches, people have heard it. Like if I tell you guys, drink a lot of water every day, this is a cliche. Everyone here has heard it. You know what happens? Cliches lose their cachet. Like you hear from one ear, it's out the other ear, right? If I, you know, but if I tell you guys, for example, snack on blueberries because they increase your focus by 4 hours because of flavonoids. Nobody here probably knows what flavonoids are, myself included, but it's intriguing. I gotta fucking find out what's flavonoids, right? I gotta like, it's that sense of novelty, specificity that kind of gets people in. They're like, okay, I can be different. I can actually get results out of this one, right? So, but yes, it's a long-winded answer to say yes, build that funnel, but make that novel. And I think we had 2 questions come in. What publishing cadence should you follow if you're publishing as a smaller team, and then where you don't have a specific person that yeah, so good question. Is it JD? Is that how you pronounce your name? Yeah, cool. So that's what I meant by this is a very elastic system. So you could do as little as once a month, I would say. Some people, believe it or not, some of the best in the world on SEO, which is a very competitive topic, they do it once every 3 months. And they, but you should read what they write, man. This is the 2,000 to 2,500 volt is a gimmick to them. Like these, some of them are like, I don't want to scare you, but they spend like $70,000 on a piece of content, right? But you see it, you're like, holy, this is like a book on the web that just like, right? But this is a very competitive space. These are some of the best guys, right? But my rule of thumb for a small company, at least once a month. If you can push it tight, you know, once every 2 weeks is even, it's like once a week is really hard, but like you really, you know, you'll gain a lot of benefits over the long term if you build that inventory, right? So it's very elastic. You can choose how fast or how slow you want to go, right? So we have vetted the content, we have the content, right? So now we have the hub. Now comes the benefits, the spokes, right? Common mistake.
Sorry, Rokham, maybe
Yes,
I missed Dina. Was that a hand raise for another question, or did you already answer that? Sorry.
Oh,
no,
I didn't even see the hand raise. Your background is
No,
yellow
okay.
and the hand is
Yeah.
yellow. Thanks, Shane.
I had a feeling that would happen, so I was like, I'll just wait until the end. I was wondering if if you had any advice regarding where to post the blogs. Do you think it would be more beneficial for the search engines to have our blogs in external blog site like Medium, or do you think it's better to have them built into the website?
Yeah, good question. We're getting to that, but I think you have a secondary question, which let me answer it. You always want the originator of the content be your own website, your own domain, because it's a little bit of a speed thing. So depending on where Google finds the content first, they are deemed as the originator, right? So you got to be careful, because Google, as a young company, young website, you don't get crawled as often as, let's say, I don't know, CNN does. CNN probably gets crawled several times a day. As a young website, you get crawled twice a week. So you definitely want to make sure Google knows this piece of content is live under your domain, and it's a very easy test. Basically, the terminology is you have been indexed by Google. So grab like your title, put it in Google, because if you grab the exact title and search for it, if you're indexed, you'll show up right away, right? And then if you want to duplicate it, or if you want to spin it a little bit and put it on Medium, by all means, we can get into all these are all great initiatives. You got to decide where you draw the line and, you know, how much effort you want to put into it, right? But I think one thing that is very important and undermined by literally every founder, myself included, is the 80-20 rule. The rule is 20% production, 80% promotion. And most of us do like 99% production and then put it on our Facebook, our LinkedIn and Twitter and go back to the drawing board and write the next post. This is like a very common practice when it comes to content creation, right? But if you do, let's say you do a piece of rich content at the beginning of the month, literally you're going to promote it throughout the month, you reap a lot more benefits than you publishing 12 mediocre, even worse than that, you know, at a high cadence, right? So now you have the piece of content, and now let's go through the spokes. Now these are the promotion parts and the benefits you reap, right? So if you guys are taking notes, feel free to put these letters next to each spoke. The first one, open a bracket and put it L for long-term, comma, F for free. And this is SEO is the name of the spoke. So SEO, search engine optimization. The second spoke is social media. And in the brackets, it's S for short term and F for free again. The third spoke is marketing automation. And it's also S for short term and F for free. The fourth one is PR, so public relations. It's S for short term and then P for paid. And the last spoke is paid ads. And it's obviously P for paid and S for short term, right? You guys remember how we started the conversation? People want low to no cost and short-term and long-term returns. This is kind of like where these spokes come in. You can activate one of them, two of them, three of them, it's flexible, or all of them. And then you can easily probably cultivate more spokes that come out of this. So let's go through them quickly because we have some time. SEO. The fact that we went through all of this that we spoke about, you already have gotten 40% of SEO down packed, which is all of your on page has been researched, there's demand, you're writing great content, etc. The 60%, which is off page, is really up to you. If you want to put effort in there, obviously you have to put effort to get a lot of SEO love. You put half the effort, you get less, just as scalable, right? So, and the idea is, you guys remember we said how we identify 20 publishers? What you got to do, there are other creative ways, but what you want to do, you want to increase that list of publishers through the same methodologies, and to, like, I roughly say for each post, identify about 100. And then you literally want to reach out to all of them, tell them there is a better answer to that problem on the market. Obviously, there's not enough time for me to go into the details. There's a lot of nuanced details, but essentially, you want to reach out to the publisher, say, look, you care about this topic. We have something that answers that exact topic. Would you be open to linking to our page? It's a very, very arduous, and like, it's a numbers game. I will be the first to admit it, right? So a lot of people outsource this, but your uptake is roughly 2 to 5%. So you reach out to 100, you get 2, maybe 5 backlinks, right? There are other ways to build backlinks. I won't go into all the ways because it just feels a bit too much. And if we have one-on-one sessions, I'm happy to share them with you, right? And the more of an expert you have in-house, the more newer opportunities you can tap into to build backlinks. So that's SEO. The second spoke is social media. Now, keep these terminologies in mind because I'm going to refer to them. The big piece that we just wrote, I call the macro piece. We're going to, out of the macro piece, we'll generate several micro pieces and a bit more nano pieces. And I'll explain what I mean. So the macro piece is a piece of content. The micro pieces are essentially, you remember we have 3 to 5 solutions to that specific problem, right? So what you want to do, I've seen from experience that that length of content translates to about 6 to 8 micro pieces, sometimes a bit more or less. What micro pieces are, imagine you're scrolling through your LinkedIn feed. Like, just literally imagine the device, how long the piece is. You want a piece of a micro piece, you want it to be fitting nicely in a feed, whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's Facebook or Twitter, where you're not linking them back to read a 2,000-word article, because nobody goes to LinkedIn to, one article after another. They just want to kind of get something quick. And you want the micro pieces to be practical solutions to that problem that you identify, right? So that as they read your post on LinkedIn, they automatically have a takeaway. They have something practical, and in this case, how to overcome burnout, right? And the beautiful thing is, you might, let's say you have 8 micro pieces come out of that 2,000, 2,500 word long, right? You can easily say, for the next 4 weeks, every week, I put 2 of these posts automated in my feeds, whether it's Facebook, whether it's LinkedIn, and you would be surprised how much interaction you'll get with them. It's mind-boggling sometimes, right? But you're always now going to have a very active feed. You'll be top of mind. You'll be a thought leader, all of these buzzwords that you hear around, right? But instead of just having to innovate and come up with new topics, it's all originating from the macro piece, right? And I apologize, I self-correct myself, since we're talking about social media, all of those are nano pieces, and I'll explain. The micro pieces are the ones that go into a marketing automation. I just used the terminology incorrectly. So, because micro is a little bit bigger than nano, and I'll explain what that means, but nano is for social media, you want it to be tight. Now, the micro pieces are very much the similar pattern, but you turn them into emails, because emails you're allowed to have, people are okay to get an email that is 500, maybe 600 words long. But on social media, that feels very long, right? So what, again, you want to do, you want to grab those practical ways to deal with burnout from the macro piece and turn them into potentially 3 to 4 emails. And guess what happens now? They turn into 3 to 4 weeks of content, because you almost send a nurturing email once a month. So now imagine this. Let's fast forward 3 articles in. You have already created 3 times 4 emails. So now you have 12 weeks worth of emails. So anyone who enters your email marketing funnel, call it your newsletter, call it whatever you want to call that frame, you know they're going to receive something valuable for their next 12 weeks. And you're going to train the user that, hey, every Saturday, every Tuesday, whatever days you pick, you're going to learn something new that helps you, in our case, reach your peak mental performance. These are all free content. This builds a lot of trust. And if you do this well enough and you add real value to people, let's say every Saturday, we do this every Saturday, you're almost given permission that every 3 Wednesdays, every 4 Wednesdays, you can now sell to them something, because you're giving value, and then you reserve every 3 Wednesdays to do something sales. So now you're building a nurturing funnel, you're building an email list, right? Because someone who comes on your blog posts, they were looking for something in particular, they stumbled on your post. But if they really like it, you say, hey, do you want to be in our newsletter? Because every week we share a tidbit on how to do X, right? If they sign up, now you're constantly in communication with them and you're building trust. So we covered SEO, which is the first spoke. We covered marketing automation, which is the correctly micro pieces in the email. And then we have covered social media, which are the nano pieces, right? With the PR, it's paid because, you know, obviously the idea is still originating from that, because now you have deep expertise about a topic. Now, how do we come up with this content that fits PR? I have to go into a little bit more detail. There are other ideas around this, but generally you can see that if you have the top expertise about that topic, we can start spinning out stories out of them. Now, how you spin out stories, you know, PR isn't always about, look at my company, let me tell you how amazing I am, I raised money. Like, that's usually what we see in PR, but continuous PR, if you're going to be in the news every week, you can't raise money every week, right? You can't have, so you have to be the conduit of value to the audience of these publishers. And we can talk about those strategies as well, but essentially we grab that topic that is researched to death, let's say, or you're the expert. Now we start reaching out to journalists to cover us. And I don't want to go into too much detail, but paid campaigns is very similar approach, where you build paid campaigns where you're not selling your end product, but you're cultivating interested audiences in your topic. So there's a lot of technical abilities with platforms like Facebook, like Instagram, every one of them, Pinterest, TikTok, that you can build what is called custom audiences, right? Which means you promote a blog post, let's say, right? And 1,000 people click on that through Facebook. You wouldn't know who they are because they just clicked on a link and they came on your website. You don't know their names, you don't know their emails unless they sign up. But Facebook, Instagram, and all the other actors in the advertisement space, they know who they are. So you can build a custom audience on these platforms and say, hey, I know these 1,000 people that I don't know them individually, but I know there's a pool of 1,000. They care about overcoming burnout. So I can now eventually remarket them to my product to them a week later, 2 weeks later, right? So this is where the paid campaigns come into play with this content that we just wrote. I know it's a lot of different directions. I usually, PR and paid is the last thing people go after because they're paid, they're a little bit more complex, but I want to take a pause a little bit. Any clarifying questions, anything that I might be vague or we need to go into more detail? Oh, perfect. JD.
Yeah, when you're thinking about sort of positioning your content strategy, so an example in our case would be, so our users are international students, our buyers are the university or the college, and sort of as part of that, you have the advisors who are sort of like the influencers in our sort of funnel. So we've been thinking, okay, who do we target, especially because we don't have this massive team to start building out content? Who do we sort of focus on targeting? Do we target the students or the advisors or just executives who control budget? So stuff like that. How do you figure out what to target?
So what you're dealing with is a classic case of selling B2B, right? When you sell to a business, you usually, this is a common theme that you don't sell to one person. You have these roles. You have the champion, you have the decision maker, right? And then you have the user. And they're usually different parties. So the rule of thumb is you actually want to get in front of the champion, because the champion is the person internally, probably can't make decisions, but in that ecosystem, now in your case is multi-pronged, they're not all part of one enterprise. They are the ones who are motivated by moving this initiative forward. They have rapport internally, they know how the internal decisions are made. And if they're aware of this solution, they kind of put you on the calendars of those folks, right? For example, for me, think of a company like VMware, monster company, a lot of people. I reached out to a director who cares, and she's the director of sales, like has nothing to do with human resources. She cared a lot about mental health. She is the champion. She literally within 2 weeks puts me on the calendar of 2 other VPs. She basically sends the invite, they're there, she's already convinced them why they should talk to me, etc. right? And they come in very motivated, right? Whereas I probably would have a much harder time getting in front of the VPs, right? So it's it's a little bit of an art, what you're saying, because you got to know who would be my champion. Sometimes we identify the right champion through experimentation, because we always want to kind of be data driven in terms of our decisions that we make, right? And there are ways to craft these experiments on a weekly, maybe bi-weekly cadence, and compare apples to apples on a metrics basis, and basically run through your different hypotheses to see who might be the right champion, right? And we have to talk about your business in more detail for me to see who would be your champion in your context, because everyone's dynamic is a bit different.
And I think with that, Luma, we have probably time for one last question before we have to wrap things up here, just to respect everyone's time. So Luma, feel free to take it away.
So maybe this is a big question, but for us, our major outlet is YouTube. We have a YouTube channel with about 21 million views and about 100,000 subscribers. So we want to funnel those users to downloading our application. Do you have like a quick tip for how to funnel them into that direction?
Well, funnel them to your app to download your application. Well, good question. There's a lot of probably legs. So one side point, maybe that's not your exact question, we'll come to it, is that you can apply since you have been developing a lot of content on YouTube, you can apply the exact same methodology I walked through in a video content. It's just text is always the easier thing to get started with. But YouTube, there's similar tools out there to say, if you give it a key phrase, how much demand is out there, who are the top results in the first page, and how can I stand out? So you can act, because there's a massive amount of power in SEO on YouTube itself, right? So which I'm sure you have tasted some of the goodness in there, right? How do you convert people to use your app? Honestly, the usual suspects are out there. So you obviously you have a big audience. So if you want to get into paid stuff, there's a lot of remarketing power in there. There is a lot of lookalike audiences that Google does a really good job around, right? But I would even consider, given you have so much content, distributing your content outside of YouTube is also a powerful thing, right? Sometimes for me, these articles, we put them on, and it's honestly a hit or miss in this case, but when it's a hit, we put them on subreddits, like a psychology subreddit that has 500,000 to 600,000 viewers. And many of our posts have been the top 3 posts over the past month. And that alone just brings a couple thousand people in a day to your site that spend quality time on your site, right? So don't undermine those things. But I think at the end of the day, everyone has this problem, which is app downloads are expensive. It's not, and organic downloads are a lot stickier than paid downloads. Like that's just the nature of the web, right? So you really got to figure out, for me, it's always about like, is seeing the content sufficient enough to download the app, or is it too big of a leap? If it's too big of a leap, you got to create an intermediary step. For example, do you want to be on our newsletter to get tidbits? I see you might even have a community of learners. Some people do these kind of initiatives, right? Which is not the app, but it's like something that they get for free and they're part of a bigger ecosystem. It's easier to opt into it, right? By no means can I definitively say which one works, but that's the whole model around data-driven, hypothesis-driven, and experimentation. As long as we set up your sales funnel together, then you can literally run these experiments very frequently and compare all of them apples to apples against your sales funnel metrics, right? We could do a hard push, which is like literally on the video calling people to download it. That's one way to do it. But if you don't have a consistent sales funnel where you compare apples to apples, no matter where people enter the funnel from, you measure what's lead MQL, SQL, and sales stages like, then we just do more of whatever works essentially. I know it's not a definitive answer, but like, I don't think anyone can give you definitively do this and you'll get more downloads.
And with that, I think, what usually happens is that a lot more kind of questions come up from the answers. And so unfortunately, we have to call time right here. And so thank you, Rokham, for joining us today.